Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm doing an author in the spotlight focusing on the wonderful classics writer Daphne du Maurier. Now Daphne du Maurier is sort of a modern classic writer who is writing sort of from like the 1930s to sort of the 1950s, and she is known for a collection of wonderful gothic novels as well as a bunch of short stories that have gone on to inspire various movies and things like that. Today I'm going to talk about the books of hers that I've read. I've read I think 5 books and 1 collection of short stories. I've by no means read all of her stuff because she has quite an extensive back catalogue, but I've really enjoyed what I have read, and she has probably kind of 2 very big name titles which I will talk about today, but I wanted to bring sort of a bit of a highlight and sort of spotlight to some of her other books that you might not have heard of that I think are actually even better than her 2 big ones. So let's jump in. Daphne du Maurier is definitely known for her really atmospheric writing. She very much is a fan of like the gothic novel format. A lot of her books are very like character driven and there's sort of a lot of mystery and intrigue to them. She has a few books that are written in like as historical fiction from much earlier than the time period that she was originally writing in, and that's quite fun as an experience, sort of reading historical fiction that in itself is already old. And she generally has things that don't end very happily, but she's a big fan of like the twist in the book. So her big one that most people know about is Rebecca. These, I have the Virago Modern Classics, by the way, if you're curious as to what all of the editions I have are. Sadly, they don't have all of her books in that form, and a lot of her books I've done on audiobook, which I would totally recommend because I do think that they really lend themselves given how descriptive and flowery the language is. Rebecca is about a relatively young woman who basically ends up marrying a guy who lives in a house called Manderley that is incredibly big, and there is still this spectre of his ex-wife who has died sort of hanging over him and her and still kind of inserting herself into their relationship. There is a fantastic twist about 2/3 of the way through that definitely makes this book. This was the first Daphne du Maurier that I'd ever attempted, and I'm not gonna lie, I was getting to kind of the halfway mark and I was a little bit bored. I didn't really get what the whole sort of hype was, and I was definitely thinking like maybe this is an author who isn't for me. Then the twist happened and I was so freaking hooked from that point on, and that was a bit where I was like, oh, I see why this woman's so notorious. It is wonderfully gloriously atmospheric. I do find the main character a little bit irritating because she's fairly naive, but I do think the twist pays it off all at the end, and it has a fantastic ending independent to the twist that happens about 2/3 through. It is a little bit long, but it is definitely worth a read. It's deserves its kind of classic status. Her other big one is My Cousin Rachel. This is about a gentleman who inherits this fairly large house and then has his mysterious cousin Rachel who comes to stay. To begin with, he's incredibly suspicious of her, then he becomes quite obsessed with her, and then again we get sort of quite a shock ending to this. It is a really lovely book. I actually enjoyed this one more than Rebecca, and it's told from the point of view of a man, which I really enjoy because I do think Daphne du Maurier does a very good job of getting into both the sort of like male or female perspective of her heads and like her characters and sort of point of view. This one also has a movie with Rachel Weisz and Sam Claflin in it that is freaking fantastic and totally worth a read. Again, I did it on audiobook, worth it. I genuinely think I might have done every single Daphne du Maurier I've ever read on audiobook form. That's quite hilarious. So I preferred this one to Rebecca. It's also slightly shorter, so I think it's a little bit more accessible. The only book of hers that I didn't particularly enjoy was Jamaica Inn. This was a book that was set on the moors, and it is about it really should have appealed to me because it's basically about pirates and smuggling and a young woman who kind of gets embroiled in a big plot, and I don't know exactly what it was, but it just didn't quite click in the way that I wanted it to. Again, I think I found our main character quite irritating, and I found that the pacing was a little bit off for me, but it is worth mentioning that I did read this in the middle of a quite major like exam period of my life, so possibly the things that were going on in my life stopped me from like truly appreciating the kind of slower paced, more descriptive style that Daphne du Maurier brings to her writing in comparison to like more modern work. But it is just kind of worth mentioning. It's one that she's not as well known for, and I did definitely enjoy it, but not as much as some others. Now we're going to move on to the 2 of hers that were my absolute favourites. Both of them I think are fantastic, and one of those is The Frenchmans Creek by, obviously by Daphne du Maurier. God, I was doing so well at not doing that in this video. I do it in every author in the spotlight. This is a bit more of a romantic one than a lot of Daphne's other work. This is about a woman who ends up embroiled in a relationship with a pirate, and it's about him trying to like smuggling various things and then her sort of getting caught up with this and trying to stop him from being captured. It was just glorious. I had such a good time with this book. It's a real kind of romp, and you really get to enjoy their sort of relationship, and it is slightly spicier than some of the other books. Emphasis on slightly. It very much is. There's a sort of few closed door scenes, yeah, and just really, really good fun. Again, it's a little bit shorter compared to things like Rebecca, and I really liked the energy of our main character. Our heroine was really willing to do quite dangerous things, so I think in comparison to some of the sort of ingenues that you get in stuff like Rebecca, I really identified with her a lot more. She just had so much more like energy and passion to her, and was really willing to fight what was important to her. So definitely an excellent read. And then my favorite one, I think, is The King's General. This is one of Daphne du Maurier's historical fictions, and it's set in the time of the Civil War in Britain, and it's focused on the royalists rather than, I think it's Cromwell who they're fighting against. So this one is really good fun for many different reasons. I really enjoyed the historical kind of political intrigue, the fact that you have this overarching, much more macro plot. It feels like it has a lot more going on to it compared to some of these other books that are a lot more focused on just like a very small cast of characters, doing a lot more character study work. The King's General really has a lot more going on in a macro political, the whole country kind of context. I really enjoyed it as a way of learning about the Civil War, which is something that I'm not particularly strong on when it comes to British history. I do need to work on improving my knowledge of that. And one thing that I really enjoyed is our heroine actually has some fantastic disability rep. She is involved in quite a nasty horse riding accident at the beginning and ends up wheelchair bound, but at no point does this stop her from absolutely kicking ass, taking names, and generally being unbelievably badass throughout the story. She also, this one is quite fun because it is based on an actual like real historical event. There was this big house where they found a gentleman like trapped in this sort of secret passageway, just sort of his decomposing body, and Daphne du Maurier used this as the inspiration for the entire storyline, which is just like the most metal cool thing I've ever heard. So incredibly cool gothic vibes there. And yeah, generally all around I really enjoy this. I love the political machinations, I loved the energies that we were bringing to it, and I loved how badass our heroine it was. And again, there's a really beautiful love story in it as well. I think Daphne du Maurier is actually secretly quite a romantic at heart, and I know that she didn't enjoy the label of romance being applied to her book and definitely identified her work more with people like Wilkie Collins, but I do think the romance elements, when she includes them, are really strong, and she writes them like just the chemistry between her characters, I really do believe they have such a wonderful like slow burn feel to them. Then I've also read a collection of her short stories, which is The Doll and Other Stories. This, it turns out, actually was like a collection of unpublished stories that she wrote when she was much younger that were found and then later published after she died. And it is one of the few short story collections that I've actually enjoyed, because I'm not a short story fan, which is very well documented on this channel. I definitely need to check out more of her work, especially her other short stories. She has like The Birds, which is made into an Alfred Hitchcock movie, but this one, The Doll and Other Stories, is fantastically creepy. The short story, The Doll itself, is really, really weird, and there's all sorts of very fun like body horror aspects to these collection, and again her writing style just seeps through. I was really worried with it being something like an unpublished collection from much earlier on in her writing career that it wouldn't feel as sort of finished and polished, but you can really see her like grasp and control of the English language before she sort of even became particularly well known. So it's lovely to see that style is still there throughout, and it's a real kind of core part of her writing. So do let me know in the comments down below, have you read any Daphne du Maurier, and what do you think should be my next big one from hers? And also, isn't it heartbreaking that there aren't more in these editions because they are so pretty? Yeah, that's pretty much it from me. Have a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye.